The story of the BRP Emilio Jacinto-class is in many ways the story of the Philippine Navy's struggle between necessity, budgetary reality, and strategic aspiration. These ships, once small patrol vessels of the Royal Navy designed for constabulary duties in Hong Kong, became the backbone of the Philippine surface fleet during a period when Manila had little else to rely on. Their origins, their limitations, and their uncertain future provide a useful lens through which to view the broader challenge of building a modern navy in a contested region like the West Philippine Sea. When the United Kingdom built the Peacock-class patrol ships in the 1980s, they were never intended to face high-intensity naval combat. Their role was to safeguard the waters around Hong Kong, to perform fisheries patrols, customs enforcement, and low-end maritime presence missions. Small in displacement and modestly armed with a 76mm gun and a few lighter weapons, they were affordable, relatively easy to crew, and tailored for a colonial outpost where the threat spectrum was limited. When Hong Kong was handed back to China in 1997, the Royal Navy no longer needed these ships. For the Philippines, however, they were an opportunity. The Navy was desperately short of hulls, its larger vessels were aging, and budget constraints meant new builds were out of reach. Acquiring 3 Peacock-class vessels and renaming them the Emilio Jacinto-class gave Manila a small but significant injection of capability. For a time, they filled a crucial gap. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, when the Philippine Navy struggled with a fleet dominated by World War II-era ships, the Jacinto-class represented relative modernity. Upgrades in the 2000s added improved electro-optical sensors, new command and control systems, and some navigation enhancements. This made them more reliable for coastal patrol and gave crews experience with more contemporary systems. Yet, from the beginning, their limitations were stark. They lacked anti-ship missiles, they had no credible air defense beyond short-range guns, and their anti-submarine capacity was essentially zero. As the region modernized, Vietnam acquiring Russian-built frigates, Indonesia commissioning Dutch and Korean designs, and Malaysia introducing French-built corvettes, the Philippine Jacinto-class quickly looked out of place. Still, they remained useful. Because they were small, relatively cheap to operate, and well-suited for constabulary missions, the Jacinto-class became the workhorses of patrol duties in the Philippine Exclusive Economic Zone. They were the ships most often seen on fisheries patrols, freedom of navigation assertions, and presence missions near contested waters. In gray zone encounters with Chinese Coast Guard or maritime militia vessels, the Jacinto-class was often the frontline platform simply because there were so few alternatives. In such roles, they could project the flag, record incidents, and provide a visible naval presence. They were never meant to fight a shooting war, but in an environment where symbolism and persistence matter as much as firepower, they were valuable tools. Comparing the Jacinto-class with other ships in the Philippine fleet highlights their relative position. The larger Pilar-class, acquired secondhand from the United States Coast Guard, had greater endurance and could range farther into the West Philippine Sea. But these ships, too, were essentially lightly armed cutters. The newer Jose Rizal-class frigates, built in South Korea and delivered in the 2020s, represent a generational leap with anti-ship missiles, better sensors, and the ability to integrate with modern task groups. Against these, the Jacinto-class looks like an aging constabulary force, one that cannot contribute meaningfully to high-end warfare. Even the ex-Pohang corvette Conrado Yap, another second-hand gift, offers better anti-submarine warfare potential than the Jacinto hulls. In the regional context, the comparison is even starker. Vietnam's Gepard-class, Indonesia's Sigma corvettes, and Malaysia's Kedah-class OPVs all outclass the Jacinto in size, survivability, and combat systems. The strategic question then becomes, what role, if any, should the Jacinto-class play in the 2020s and 2030s? One option is life extension. With modest investments in sensors and remote weapon stations, the ships could continue to serve for another 5 to 8 years. They could handle patrols, EEZ monitoring, and low-intensity missions, freeing the more capable frigates to focus on deterrence and warfighting. The cost of such upgrades, however, is significant relative to the return. Without missiles or robust air defense, no amount of modernization will make them survivable in a conflict with China or any regional navy. Upgrading risks throwing good money after bad. Another option is to transfer them to the Philippine Coast Guard. This would align their capabilities with missions that are constabulary in nature, law enforcement, anti-smuggling, fisheries protection, while allowing the Navy to concentrate on warfighting platforms. The Coast Guard is increasingly the lead actor in the West Philippine Sea anyway, and integrating Jacinto-class ships into its fleet could provide valuable hulls with naval standard endurance. The challenge here is budgetary. The Coast Guard would need to sustain them, and that requires resources of its own. A third, more strategic option is to phase them out entirely, as new offshore patrol vessels and corvettes enter the fleet under Horizon 3 of the modernization program. This would allow the Philippine Navy to rationalize its force structure, moving away from patchwork second-hand platforms toward a more coherent modern fleet. The Subic shipyard and domestic shipbuilding industry could benefit from such replacements, building local competence and reducing reliance on old hand-me-downs. Yet this path depends on whether procurement and funding schedules stay on track, something Philippine defense planners have historically struggled with. At the heart of the debate is the balance between operating expenditure and capital investment. Every peso spent on keeping an old ship at sea is a peso not invested in acquiring a new frigate, missile system, or submarine. The Emilio Jacinto-class represents that trade-off in its clearest form. They are still seaworthy, they still perform useful tasks, but they embody a strategy of making do rather than building for the future. For a Navy that faces the daunting reality of Chinese maritime expansion, making do is not enough. The conclusion is that the Jacinto-class is best understood not as a fighting ship, but as a symbol. It symbolizes the era when the Philippine Navy survived on second-hand vessels, constantly adapting to shortages. It symbolizes the persistence of Philippine sailors who maintained presence despite limited tools. And it symbolizes the limitations of a force that could not, by itself, deter or match the power projection of its neighbors. As Horizon 3 unfolds, the Navy must transition away from symbols of survival toward instruments of deterrence. That means frigates with missiles, submarines with endurance, maritime patrol aircraft with sensors, and partnerships with allies that amplify Philippine capacity. For now, the Emilio Jacinto-class continues to sail, doing the patrols, showing the flag, and reminding observers of the resourcefulness of a small navy. But their long-term destiny lies not in being upgraded into something they can never be, but in being replaced by ships designed for the challenges of the West Philippine Sea. Whether they are transferred to the Coast Guard, maintained as training platforms, or retired altogether, their story is a chapter, not the conclusion. The Philippine Navy's task is to ensure that the next chapter is written not in the language of second-hand hand-me-downs, but in the grammar of true modernization and credible deterrence.